Aquesta sessió es farà en català i en anglès. Vostès tenen interpretació, per als que vulguin els hi serà facilitada. Bé, avui presentem, vostès saben que en la preparació del tercer Congrés d'Economia i Empresa s'ha dividit en àmbits, que els hi diem eixos, i avui presentem les conclusions de l'eix 1, que és com consta el marc global, tendències mundials amb geopolítica en el marc de la perspectiva de la Unió Europea. Vull insistir en la darrera part del títol d'aquest eix, que és en la perspectiva de la Unió Europea. O sigui que no es contempla de manera genèrica el tema de la globalització i la geopolítica o geoestratègia des d'un punt de vista abstracte, sinó que ho contemplem des de la perspectiva de la Unió Europea. El que explica, com explicarà el nostre relator Guillem Rovira, la presentació de les ponències que s'han fet. Per tant, en primer lloc, gràcies per la seva assistència, per al seu interès. Amb aquest acte d'avui tanquem un procés que vam començar el juliol de l'any passat, amb el Call for Papers, demanant ponències. Insisteixo, el senyor Guillem Rovira explicarà el contingut i els que hem rebut i farà la síntesi que nosaltres presentarem a la plenària del Congrés, que està prevista, ho dic per als que no s'hagin apuntat, tenen encara temps per apuntar-s'hi, el 17 de maig al dematí. Serà una sessió molt intensa, però d'un dematí. Com aquesta eix ha tingut una comissió que he tingut l'honor de presidir a proposta del col·legi i he estat assistit per un vicepresident, que és el professor Jordi Beccaria, com a vicepresident, i el senyor Guillem Rovira com a relator, més uns membres que ens han acompanyat en aquesta comissió. Jo voldria expressar el meu agraïment de manera molt especial al director, que no el veig. No, el director del Congrés, el Daniel Kerr, que ha sigut d'un ajut i d'una capacitat d'organització extraordinària. I, per tant, el nostre agraïment per la seva dedicació, per la seva atenció, tenint en compte que ell controla 13 eixos, que hagi dedicat tant temps al nostre, i suposo que als altres, hem d'agrair especialment la seva atenció i dedicació. Vull agrair també especialment al relator Guillem Rovira, que com veuran ha fet, primer s'ha llegit amb molta atenció els treballs i després farà la síntesi que a continuació presentaré. I també voldria agrair que hi ha dos membres d'aquesta comissió. Un és un que prèviament va ser degà, que és el senyor Francesc Raventós, que ens ha fet una contribució en col·laboració amb en Xavier Ferrer sobre Brexit, molt interessant, també des d'una perspectiva europea, i el propi Xavier Ferrer, que m'ha dit que vindria amb nosaltres més tard, que ha fet una altra col·laboració sobre un altre tema molt clau per nosaltres, que és actualitzar la seva tesi doctoral, que va dirigir el professor Francesc Granell, que era sobre la política de seguretat i defensa de la Unió Europea i que l'ha actualitzat i que, sens dubte, és una contribució tant a nivell geoestratègic, ara que s'anuncien míssils macos i intel·ligents, doncs per al tema de la geopolítica i la geoestratègia a nivell internacional, però insisteixo, des d'una perspectiva de la Unió Europea, que és el que ell desenvolupa. Per tant, moltes gràcies per les seves contribucions, per haver pogut... Jo crec que presentem, no moltes, però sí una sèrie de comunicacions d'alta qualitat, que està molt en el marc de l'exigència del Congrés. Vostès saben que al Congrés nosaltres elaborem i promovem una sèrie de comunicacions, de ponències, però que hi ha un filtre, que és el comitè científic, que està presidit per una persona reconeguda a nivell internacional, que és el professor Andreu Mascollell. I són els membres del comitè també, però el president és en Mascollell i també pertany al Francesc Granell. O sigui que... Però el que hem presentat, hem fet una mica de filtre, no ho hem acceptat tot, però jo crec que el que hem presentat perquè ho valori el comitè científic té un nivell adequat per les exigències del Congrés. Per tant, amb aquests agraïments i aquesta presentació, cedeixo la paraula al senyor Guillem Rovira, que és el nostre relator i que, insisteixo, ho ha seguit amb detall i amb dedicació, i reitero el nostre agraïment. Guillem, tens la paraula.
Bona tarda, moltes gràcies, Carles. Només em podria sumar als agraïments que ha formulat en Carles Gasòliba i la satisfacció tant per part agraït al col·legi per la invitació que ens ha fet, que m'ha fet personalment, a tot l'equip de treball que hem compartit aquests gairebé 8 mesos de treball conjunt, i la satisfacció de veure aquí entre la sala antics professors, antics companys, diputats del Parlament Europeu, antics diputats, directors de quan jo donava classes a la universitat. És una satisfacció d'estar aquí, en el fons, com a casa meva, casa nostra. Faré bàsicament una presentació, com ha comentat el senyor Carles Gasòliba, una presentació dels treballs de la comissió i després els 4 eixos en els quals hem dividit les ponències que finalment s'han considerat com que responien al que ens havíem fixat. La comissió es va formalitzar, es va constituir el juliol de l'any passat, i en la primera reunió el que ens vam proposar, els que vam assistir, era precisar una mica sobre quins serien els temes que ens agradaria poder invitar i poder rebre contribucions. El títol global és el marc global, tendències mundials en geopolítica en el marc de la perspectiva de la Unió Europea, com molt bé ha apuntat en Carles Gasòliba, i vam definir 4 subpunts per intentar acotar o conduir millor el que podrien ser les distintes contribucions. El primer subpunt era lògic, entenent que nosaltres estem a la Unió Europea, és la Unió Europea com a actor global. El segon punt era globalització, la governança econòmica supranacional, multilateralisme versus aicionisme i proteccionisme. El tercer punt era l'aplicació i el desenvolupament dels acords internacionals bilaterals i multilaterals, i el quart i darrer punt de l'eix seria els efectes de les noves tecnologies en el marc econòmic internacional, bàsicament la seva aplicació a les transaccions comercials, de serveis, fluxos, ciberseguretat, tots aquests punts que estan avui en dia a l'ordre del dia. Des de la comissió també vam promoure, sobretot en aquest cas el seu president, el senyor Carles Gasòliba, vam fer una difusió complementària de l'eix. El Col·legi Economista, lògicament, amb la seva secretaria, va fer una difusió general del col·legi, del Congrés, però nosaltres ens vam adreçar a uns col·lectius que potser ens eren més propers, professors, experts, tant de l'àmbit públic com privat, per intentar arribar al màxim d'experts possibles que volguessin presentar una contribució. Al voltant de l'octubre, del mes d'octubre, vam començar a rebre ja els primers abstracts per participar en aquest test del Congrés, i després d'alguna petita valoració molt puntual es van acceptar la majoria de propostes. I va ser ja, ens en anem ja cap al mes de febrer-març, alguna ponència va arribar, això passa a tots els congressos, una mica més tard del que estava previst, doncs vam rebre distintes ponències de distints àmbits i les vam analitzar en el si de la comissió una per una. És una anàlisi que hem feta sempre complementària, distinta a la revisió científica que ha fet el comitè científic del Congrés. Nosaltres hem fet una valoració, sobretot, per veure si aquestes ponències encaixaven, responien als criteris que ens havíem fixat i sobretot si responien a l'eix número 1. Alguna ponència, per exemple, es va suggerir que passés amb un altre eix al Congrés i alguna altra ponència es va considerar que tal vegada no reunia de moment els requisits que ens havíem proposat inicialment. De les ponències rebudes hem retingut 7 ponències, se n'ha rebut una fins i tot abans d'ahir d'un professor que està als Estats Units, aquesta encara no l'hem pogut valorar, eventualment seria valorada més endavant. Les hem agrupat en el si de la Comissió de Treball en 4 àmbits, atesa una mica per poder simplificar la presentació, aquest relat que fem avui en aquesta sessió. Són 4 àmbits que són els següents. El primer, i és un àmbit clar, és el de la Unió Econòmica i Monetària, és a dir, la resposta de la Unió a la crisi financera del 2008. És curiós veure com 3 de les ponències rebudes, totes 3 van incidir molt en aquest àmbit i per tant considerem que era fonamental. La resposta de la Unió a la crisi financera del 2008 i com la Unió Europea hi ha donat resposta. El segon punt, i a més el ponent que avui ens acompanya és una persona que també segurament ens podrà il·lustrar moltíssim més del que jo els hi podré dir, és la retirada del Regne Unit de la Unió Europea, el Brexit i les seves implicacions. No només es tracta d'una qüestió que concerneix el Regne Unit i les seves relacions amb la Unió Europea, sinó que té un abast segurament molt més important. El tercer punt és la seguretat i la defensa de la Unió en el context mundial. Seria el tercer àmbit de les ponències. I finalment, el quart punt, vinculat amb un altre eix del Congrés, és els objectius per al desenvolupament sostenible i l'actuació de la Unió Europea envers l'economia sostenible, és a dir, desenvolupament sostenible i medi ambient. Aquests són els 4 vectors sobre els quals ara faré en pocs minuts una presentació i un resum de conclusions del que s'ha considerat per part de la Comissió de Treball de l'eix número 1. El primer punt, la Unió Econòmica i Monetària, la crisi financera del 2008. Aquí es van rebre 3 ponències molt significatives. La primera és la ponència presentada per 2 responsables, alts responsables de la Comissió Europea, el senyor Javier Yáñez i Carlos Martínez, que són respectivament director i cap d'unitat de la DG Ecofin de la Comissió Europea. I han fet una ponència sobre situació econòmica i debate político en la zona euro, la reforma de la Unió Econòmica i Monetària. La segona ponència és una ponència de caràcter molt més analític, extremadament interessant també, és potser l'única ponència que hem trobat d'anàlisi econòmica més aviat sobre models economètrics, a càrrec, que és The Economic Convergence Within the Euroland in the Global Post-Crisis. I l'autor és el senyor Andrei Radulescu, director de la Banca de Transilvània. És una ponència a la qual faré referència extremament interessant. I finalment, la tercera ponència és del senyor Sergi Cotillas, economista, investigador i cofundador d'Econa, cap a un nou Bretton Woods per a Europa. Una ponència també, com comentaré, que apunta a uns escenaris una mica més crítics. Què ens diuen aquestes 3 ponències? En primer lloc, ens recorden que la Unió Econòmica i Monetària ja fa 19 anys que és entre nosaltres, si podríem descomptar-ne 3 el temps de la circulació de bitllets i monedes, i que la primera gran crisi que ha sofert la Unió Econòmica i Monetària, curiosament, s'ha generat fora de la zona euro. és la crisi financera als Estats Units, la crisi del 2008, que és el detonant d'una crisi que després tindria unes repercussions fortíssimes sobre la zona euro. I, curiosament, aquesta crisi, la crisi del 2008, és la que, en la mesura que ha fet aflorar que la Unió Europea no disposava de tots els instruments necessaris que habitualment disposa una zona econòmicament integrada, una Unió Econòmica Monetària, ha fet saltar la segona crisi del deute, en aquest cas ja sí, més pròpia dels estats de la Unió Europea. Crisi del deute que ha afectat, com vostès saben, bàsicament els països del sud de la zona euro. Aquesta crisi va posar en qüestió, va posar fins i tot al límit, es comenta, de la fallida, amb un risc evident, la pròpia construcció de la Unió Econòmica Monetària. Les respostes de la Unió Europea van ser lentes. Per què van ser lentes? Perquè eren mecanismes que no estaven previstos en els tractats. No s'havia previst una gestió, uns mecanismes bàsicament en l'àmbit de la política pressupostària. Per tant, aquí es va donar progressivament la reforma del Pacte d'Estabilitat i de Creixement, es va crear uns mecanismes, un transitori i un més permanent, el mecanisme europeu d'estabilitat, el MEDE, es va posar en funcionament el sistema de semestres, de vigilància semestral, el llançament d'un pla d'inversions, el pla Juncker, etc. O fins i tot l'impuls de la Unió Bancària, tot i que, com saben vostès, encara no està del tot consolidada. Per tant, és la resposta lenta de la Unió Europea a la crisi. La ponència dels dos representants de la Comissió Europea també és una ponència que té uns elements de perspectiva, de futur i d'elements positius. Constata, en termes macroeconòmics, que ja fa uns 5 anys que ells consideren que la crisi ha passat una mica a la part més difícil de la crisi i que estaríem en una etapa de recuperació. Per tant, aquí s'apunta a una recuperació de la demanda externa, una recuperació de la inversió, del consum, però anoten, i això ho sabem molt clarament en el cas de l'estat espanyol, una fragilitat. Fragilitat amb el sector financer, tenim casos que no cal repetir, la moderació o la gairebé no recuperació dels nivells salarials, etc. Per tant, aquí clarament hi ha uns riscos que continuen, que romanen molt extensos a la zona euro. Per la seva banda, la segona ponència, del senyor Andreu Radulescu, efectua una anàlisi analítica per valorar l'evolució de la convergència econòmica, la convergència de les economies de la zona euro. És un model molt interessant, comprèn el període 96-2017 i constata l'evolució de la convergència, si realment les economies convergien o no han convergit al llarg de tot aquest període. I arriba a una conclusió força interessant dient que la convergència econòmica, malgrat tot, s'ha mantingut, en termes, evidentment, macroeconòmics. S'ha mantingut i en els moments pitjors de la crisi, aquesta convergència, evidentment, s'ha eixamplat la divergència, s'ha eixamplat una certa divergència, però s'ha mantingut gràcies, i aquí anota, a la intervenció a la política monetària expansiva del Banc Central Europeu, s'ha arribat a dir que és la intervenció que va salvar l'euro, això algun dia els historiadors d'història econòmica estaran en condicions de valorar-ho, i després per la pròpia governança, la pròpia millora de la zona euro que ha permès esmorteir aquesta divergència naixent. El professor Radulescu, el senyor Radulescu, evidentment diu que apunta que cal afrontar alguns reptes que no es poden deixar de cap manera, com serien la millora de la productivitat, la implementació de l'economia digital i, en general, les reformes estructurals. És a dir, són deures a fer per evitar que això no torni a succeir. I la tercera ponència, que ja he anunciat que potser era una mica més crítica, fa una exposició detallada i molt interessant de tota la crisi, des dels seus orígens, el perquè, els diferents moviments polítics i posicions que hi va haver entre els diferents estats, com es va gestionar, visió francesa, visió alemanya, i anota dos escenaris polítics que són els que condicionarien el futur de la Unió Econòmica Monetària. Apunta que hi hauria el model federalista, que englobaria els països més liberals, més europeista, i el model, diguem-ne, conservador de la Unió de l'Estabilitat, que seria representat en aquest cas potser per països com Alemanya i els que segueixen. I el que apunta el senyor Sergi Cotillas és a dir que hi ha un risc de fractura si això realment no s'acaba produint una síntesi i una unió econòmica i monetària basada en uns principis comuns. Considera que aquestes dues visions tan antagonistes, per exemple, el rebuig als eurobons sistemàtic d'un país, la imposició d'una política d'austeritat de l'altre, doncs que això a mig i llarg termini podria provocar una esqueixada de la Unió Econòmica i Monetària. Aquest seria el primer punt, el que m'he estès més, el primer àmbit de la Unió Econòmica i Monetària. El segon àmbit, abordat per l'eix número 1 del Congrés, és la retirada del Regne Unit de la Unió Europea. Aquí, com ha comentat el senyor Carles Gasòliba, hem disposat d'una ponència elaborada pel senyor Xavier Ferrer i Francesc Reventós. Francesc Reventós és aquí entre nosaltres, el Xavier Ferrer que encara no ha arribat, en la qual assenyala els efectes macroeconòmics estàtics del Brexit, és a dir, què succeeix l'endemà del Brexit, caiguda del PIB per efectes estadístics, caiguda de la població per efectes estadístics, i després apunta també els efectes més aviat dinàmics, és a dir, els efectes posteriors. I anota que els efectes del Brexit, segons la informació disponible, serien més aviat durs a nivell econòmic pel propi Regne Unit. En canvi, per la Unió Europea, els efectes del Brexit serien de dos tipus. Seria un repte pel pressupost, una dificultat pel pressupost de la Unió Europea. Veig que el senyor Colom està anotant, això ho coneix també tan bé com molt millor que nosaltres. Doncs el Regne Unit, tot i tenir el xec britànic, el Regne Unit és un estat contribuent net de la Unió Europea. I la seva sortida del pressupost comunitari, doncs, evidentment, tindrà una incidència, pot tenir una incidència en algunes de les polítiques de la Unió i, bàsicament, aquí tothom anota la política de cohesió. I el segon gran dubte és el paper del Regne Unit, en definitiva, en el lideratge europeu. El Regne Unit mai ha estat un estat, diguem-ne, alineat amb els grans fonaments de la Unió Europea, però sí que ha estat un estat fonamental pel seu pes, per les seves característiques en la pròpia Unió Europea. I és aquí s'obre una doble possibilitat, una possibilitat d'aprofitar la sortida del Regne Unit per fer més Europa en alguns àmbits que el Regne Unit s'hi havia oposat, o bé realment patir les conseqüències de la sortida d'un soci tan important. Aquests serien potser els eixos que he pensat més rellevants. El tercer àmbit, la tercera ponència, és la seguretat i la defensa de la Unió en el context mundial. Aquí novament tenim una extensa ponència presentada per en Xavier Ferrer, economista i politòleg, per això té aquesta doble vessant i aquesta capacitat de treballar àmbits tan distints, en la qual fa un recull de l'evolució de la política de la Unió en l'àmbit de la defensa. Recorda que no va ser fins al Tractat de Maastricht que bàsicament es va apuntar els primers elements d'una acció en l'àmbit de la defensa, les reformes successives dels tractats, i anota, amb algunes dades econòmiques, la diferència enorme de PIB, d'inversió, tant en termes de PIB, de despesa per habitant en relació al PIB, en despesa en l'àmbit militar. La despesa que fan els estats europeus a la seva defensa és baixíssima o molt més reduïda en relació a la despesa que poden fer altres potències com pot ser els Estats Units, Rússia o Xina. I en aquest cas anota aquesta dificultat. Apunta també l'impacte del Brexit en el cas de la política de defensa. El Regne Unit és un país, amb França són les dues grans potències militars que té actualment, jo diria, els estats de la Unió Europea, doncs la sortida d'un d'ells, tot i romandre a l'OTAN, segurament podria debilitar de forma notòria la capacitat o la política de defensa i de seguretat de la Unió Europea. I apunta el senyor Xavier Ferrer a la necessitat que la Unió Europea ha d'abordar la qüestió de política de defensa d'una forma seriosa. És a dir, l'única manera d'acompanyar un bloc que tingui una certa hegemonia, un cert pes en el context mundial, en un context globalitzat, des d'un punt de vista econòmic, de defensa dels drets humans i de defensa del medi ambient, és també, no pot oblidar la pota, si em permet l'expressió, l'eix de la defensa. I finalment, i amb això ja estaria acabant, el quart àmbit de l'eix seria els objectius per al desenvolupament sostenible i l'actuació de la Unió Europea envers l'economia circular. Són dues ponències, la primera d'elles és pel professor i catedràtic de l'Organització Econòmica Internacional Francesc Ganell, que són els objectius de les Nacions Unides pel desenvolupament sostenible 2016-2030. I la segona ponència, de caràcter ja més centrada a la Unió Europea, és la ponència El medio ambiente en el presente y futuro, també en aquest cas escrita, hem tingut la sort de comptar amb la contribució del senyor Daniel Calleja, director general de Medi Ambient de la Comissió Europea. La ponència del professor Granell ens efectua també una síntesi de l'evolució de la lluita pel desenvolupament impulsada des de les Nacions Unides, en aquest cas una ponència que clarament encaixa amb l'objectiu de l'eix, és una visió, diguem-ne, multilateral, i aleshores anota que va ser sobretot a partir de la Conferència de Rio l'any 92 en què es comença a vincular clarament política de desenvolupament amb medi ambient. Fins ara havien estat polítiques més dispars. Ens fa un recordatori de l'evolució d'aquesta política amb la gran fita de l'Assemblea General de les Nacions Unides de l'any 2000 amb la Declaració del Mil·lenni, amb l'aprovació dels 8 objectius del desenvolupament del mil·lenni que cobrien el període 2001-2015. I el professor Granell aquí ens indica com a èxit, si més no estadístic, però és un èxit, és la caiguda enorme de la pobresa extrema, estem parlant, en aquest període que hauria caigut del 47% de la població mundial al 24% només de pobresa extrema en 8 anys. I això, si ho podem atribuir als objectius del mil·lenni, doncs segurament seria un èxit del qual ens podríem congratular. Sobre la base dels objectius del mil·lenni, dels ODM, diferents institucions, les institucions europees, les agències de l'ONU, el G20, l'OCDE, etc., van elaborar tot un treball també coordinat per donar lloc als objectius coneguts com a objectius del desenvolupament sostenible, els ODS, que són els que haurien de cobrir el període 2016-2030, els ODS, i aquí és uns objectius molt més ambiciosos. Sobre la base dels ODMs ens plantegem els ODS, als quals la Unió Europea se'ls fa seu, i hauria de cobrir un període 2016-2030. Són 17 objectius que abracen ja molt més enllà només de la pobresa o del medi ambient. Petits elements sobre els ODS seria que aquests objectius els compartirien gairebé la totalitat dels estats del món. El professor Granell, potser vostè m'ho confirmarà, però aquí tinc anotat 193 països i a més amb la gran novetat que també ho subscriuen els països pobres. No només és una contribució feta dels països rics cap als països pobres, sinó tothom, països pobres en la seva mesura, doncs també es comprometen amb els ODS. Anota també un punt que ens ha cridat l'atenció a la comissió de l'eix, és que d'aquests 17 punts dels ODS hi ha uns que són compartits gairebé per tothom, lluita contra la pobresa, acció pel clima, accés a l'aigua, els recursos hídrics, recursos marins, però en altres àmbits hi ha alguns estats que es fan una mica, diguem-ne, el ronso, que seria, per exemple, igualtat d'home-dona, drets humans, institucions, sistemes democràtics. Tots aquests objectius potser no serien vistos amb tanta prioritat o tanta èmfasi per part d'alguns estats. La darrera ponència, i amb això acabaré, la del senyor Daniel Calleja, ens exposa clarament l'orientació de la política de la Unió Europea en l'àmbit del medi ambient, una política nascuda als anys, generada bàsicament als anys 80 amb l'Acta Única Europea i que està totalment ara enfocada o recull, està integrada en els objectius de l'ODS. Aquesta política, aquesta ponència anota que el manteniment del sistema productiu actual, tal com el coneixem, és absolutament inviable. I aquí una dada que tothom coneix és que el planeta caldria 1,7 planetes simplement per poder oferir recursos hídrics, primeres matèries, energia, perquè poder continuar produint i consumint amb el mateix ritme que ho fem actualment. És un planeta que no donaria més d'així. I a més, el segon àmbit, el segon gran límit, és la gestió dels residus. Si a sobre de produir d'aquesta manera no gestionem adequadament els residus, o si els gestionéssim adequadament, els costos d'assumir, de tractar aquests residus serien també inassumibles. I aquí conclou el professor Calleja, amb el senyor Daniel Calleja, el director, amb un terme que ara sortirà i estarà present a totes les administracions, espero que no només a la Comissió Europea, és la noció d'economia circular. Economia circular vol dir que l'economia productiva ha d'elaborar béns i serveis més durables i, a més, que els seus residus siguin aprofitats de forma adequada. I, finalment, la ponència del senyor Calleja agafa, ho exemplifica amb un sector que és crucial, del qual hem parlat, que és el sector del plàstic. El plàstic, als anys 60, era la revolució, als anys 70 també, ara continua sent un sector fonamental. Qualsevol cosa que aquí ens acompanya en aquesta taula segurament té objectes de plàstic, però és insostenible la manera que tenim de gestionar el plàstic. I llavors el senyor Daniel Calleja exposa una mica com la Comissió Europea pretén abordar un sector concret, el del plàstic, que ens concerneix a tot. Bé, aquest seria, senyor Carles Gasòliba, una mica la presentació, una mica succinta. M'he deixat segurament moltíssimes coses molt importants dels diferents ponents, però potser tal vegada això seria el resum executiu que podíem fer avui. Moltes gràcies.
Moltes gràcies, relator. Crec que ens podem fer i sentir satisfets de la contribució que farem en el Congrés. Espero que el comitè científic i també en la sessió plenària quedin recollides aquestes aportacions i que en el volum, que serà molt voluminós, que recollirà totes les aportacions al Congrés, aquestes estaran incorporades. Per tant, moltes gràcies al senyor Daniel Kerr, que discretament s'ha posat en la darrera fila o la banda darrera fila, que consti que li hem expressat el nostre agraïment per la seva contribució als treballs del nostre eix. Tots els presents són testimonis que li hem expressat aquest agraïment. Nosaltres també expressem el nostre agraïment al nostre conferenciant, que en aquesta sessió, per nosaltres solemne, de cloenda de l'EJU, va acceptar amb la seva generositat habitual al fer la conferència de cloenda, que és el senyor Pat Cox. Des del primer moment es va plantejar que entre l'abril i el maig tots els eixos tindrien una sessió per presentar les seves conclusions, com acaba de fer el senyor Guillem Rovira, i ja aleshores es va plantejar a la comissió que la persona ideal per fer-ho seria el senyor Pat Cox. I perquè, insisteixo, és el marc global des d'una perspectiva de la Unió Europea. I aleshores, per fer un anàlisi i parlar i reflexionar sobre aquest marc global, però des d'una perspectiva europea, tots vam coincidir que el millor, la persona més adequada seria el nostre conferenciant d'avui. Jo el conec molt, afortunadament, però alguns de vostès potser no. I, per tant, voldria fer una breu síntesi del seu currículum. Primer, el senyor Pat Cox és del nostre gremi, és economista. Està format a les universitats de Mèrit i en el molt famós i molt prestigiós Trinity College de Dublín. Ha sigut professor a l'Institut d'Administració Pública de Dublín i també de Limerick, si no estic equivocat, i a més es va fer famós a Irlanda perquè va ser un divulgador a la ràdio i la televisió irlandeses, no només en temes econòmics, també econòmics, però això va fer que fos una persona coneguda per allò que diem el gran públic. Va encetar una carrera política. El 1989 va ser elegit membre del Parlament Europeu. que va mantenir aquesta representació en el Parlament Europeu fins al 2004 i també va ser elegit el 92 membre del Parlament irlandès. No ho pronuncio bé, però es diu Dáil Éireann. I en el Parlament irlandès va ser elegit, saben que hi ha el sistema de constituencies unipersonals, i va ser elegit per Cork, que ha sigut un dels llocs on ha viscut fins fa uns anys i ara està ubicat a Dublín. Va ser reelegit com a diputat al Parlament Europeu el 94 i el 99 i va ser elegit president del Parlament Europeu, la qual cosa per un membre liberal i independent, com era ell en aquells moments, els hi asseguro, el senyor Colom també ho sap, que no és fàcil, perquè normalment hi ha un acord no escrit entre les dues grans famílies fins ara del Parlament Europeu, que són els socialdemòcrates i els populars, abans dits demòcrates cristians, que la presidència era alternada entre els dos grans grups. D'una manera molt, molt excepcional, hi ha hagut una presidència que no ha respost a aquesta alternància. La primera va ser la que va obtenir una senyora liberal, molt respectada, en les primeres eleccions al Parlament. Eleccions per sufragi universal i directe, com és ara, el 79, que va ser la senyora Simone Veil, i el digne successor com a liberal per tenir la presidència, uns anys després, va ser el senyor Pat Cox. Pat Cox és irlandès i és un irlandès europeista. I ell té un premi que li envejo molt, però que només les altes personalitats a la Unió Europea tenen, que és Premi Carlemany. El 2004 va deixar el Parlament Europeu i des d'aleshores es va dedicar per una banda a l'exercici privat com a consultor, però sempre ha mantingut una dimensió pública. Primer va ser president del moviment europeu internacional. El senyor Colom el coneix bé perquè ell ho va compartir com a president del Consell Català del Moviment Europeu. Després va ser president de la molt important Associació d'Antics Parlamentaris Europeus. Dic que és molt important perquè és l'entitat que gestiona les nostres pensions. I Déu-n'hi-do el fons que manega, té una certa influència. I en l'actualitat és el president també d'una entitat europeista poc coneguda aquí, però hi ha alguns catalans que hi pertanyem, que es diu Fundació Jean Monnet pour l'Europe. Curiosament, Jean Monnet, dic curiosament perquè era francès, però el seu fons documental no el va deixar a França, potser perquè coneixia els francesos, i el va dipositar a la Universitat de Lausanne, on hi havia un professor sobre Europa, en els quals s'hi va associar molt a la seva darrera etapa, el Jean Monnet, i va deixar el fons. Aquest fons està molt ben guardat, està en un lloc encantador, que es diu la Ferme de Dorigny, que és una granja que està autèntica dins del campus de la Universitat de Lausanne, i és un centre veritablement dedicat a l'anàlisi, al coneixement i la difusió de l'ideari, no només de Jean Monnet, però l'ideari que mou o que ens mou cap a una Unió Europea cada vegada més desenvolupada. El senyor Francesc Granell també és membre del Consell i ho coneix bé. En l'actualitat, el president de la Fundació Jean Monnet pour l'Europe, ubicada a la Universitat de Lausanne, és el senyor Pat Cox. Per tant, nosaltres gaudim d'una persona d'una dimensió internacional i alhora europea. I hem de reiterar el nostre agraïment perquè, com deia abans, amb la seva generositat tradicional, perquè és una persona oberta, acollidora, doncs, que ens coneix bé, ha estat diverses vegades ja a Barcelona per diverses activitats, doncs avui gaudim de la seva presència i del seu mestratge, com ens demostrarà amb la seva intervenció d'ara. Moltes gràcies.
Thank you. I can go here?
As you like.
Yeah, I think I may stand up.
If you are more comfortable,
You can go with that. Does this work? Yeah, the micro is on, yeah? 1, 2, 3, yeah. So, this works? Yes. Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it is an honor and a pleasure for me to join you. And I thank you for the invitation to be here today to address this third Congress of Economy and Enterprise of Catalonia. In particular, it's a pleasure to have been invited by my friend and former colleague, Carles Gasòliba, and also to see here and welcome my former colleague, Joan Colom. It's wonderful to see him here. We've done a lot of work together over the years on different things, both inside and outside the European Parliament. We first met as members in 1989, after the European elections of that summer. And we went on to work closely together on the Economic and Monetary Committee, where for a long number of years, Carles was my boss, in effect, because he was the group's coordinator on the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, on which I was a member at that time. I want to give you a little roadmap of what you might expect to hear from me today. I want to begin with offering you a sense of how different things were 3 decades ago. In other words, the time when we met, or indeed, as I understand, the time when you last had a Congress like this, because a lot has changed and it's worth reflecting on it. I then want to proceed to consider key issues likely to dominate the European Union's agenda in the next few years, and to suggest to you, when we consider them, that most of these issues, whether they are convergent, divergent, consensual or contested, will prove that they have one characteristic in common, that they are introspective more than geopolitical. They are Europe talking to itself about itself, but not talking to itself so much about the wider world. The third thing I want to do is obviously to take note of a wider global drift towards authoritarianism and national self-assertion among key international players, including a mix of populism and nationalism among others who are not necessarily so authoritarian. I want to consider developments in China, Russia, and the United States that will impact the context of geopolitics, and the paper concludes with a brief reflection on some of the constraints that may need to be addressed in the European Union if we wish to exhibit, as Europeans, greater geopolitical weight and influence. Let me first begin with setting the scene. 3 decades ago, the European Community consisted of 12 member states. The single market was adopted, but had still to be realised. The single currency was an idea at an advanced stage of development, but not yet an adopted policy of the European Community. Germany was divided, comprising 2 states, the Federal Republic of Germany and the German Democratic Republic. The wall still divided Berlin. The Soviet Union was undergoing glasnost and perestroika under President Gorbachev. The Cold War was showing some signs of thawing with the signature of the Intermediate Nuclear Range Treaty in Washington, D.C. at the end of 1987. Central and Eastern European states at that time were part of the Warsaw Pact and Comecon. The 3 Baltic states then were an increasingly uneasy part of the Soviet Union. Slobodan Milosevic delivered a speech at Kosovo Polja in late June of 1989, hinting darkly at the possibility of armed battles in the future of Serbia's national development. China's leader, Deng Xiaoping, was then being pilloried in the West for his crackdown against the students on Tiananmen Square, but being revered at home for his adoption of state capitalism. Saddam Hussein hadn't invaded Kuwait, so that came later, and of course then the American response to that Kuwaiti invasion came later. International trade negotiations at that time were under the auspices of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and globalization and the World Trade Organization were still some years away. The World Wide Web was not yet invented, although its military form was already in existence, but not in wide use. Smart communications technology and social media were unknown, except in fiction or among futurologists. Compared to today, geopolitically, this was not just another time, but it was, in fact, another place. As we returned to Strasbourg in the late summer of 1989, we were on the threshold of witnessing what finished as a European annus mirabilis. On August the 19th at Sopron, on the Austrian-Hungarian border, a hole was cut in the barbed wire fence, leading to what some reported at that time as the picnic that changed the world, because people from Austria, led by the then MEP Otto von Habsburg, and people from Hungary, led by the then Hungarian Prime Minister, mingled freely across the border whose wire fence they had clipped. I have in my study at home a piece of that wire wrapped in the tricolored Hungarian ribbon that it was presented with, a silent witness at home to the high hopes of that new democratic dawn. Then on the 9th of November, the Berlin Wall came crashing down, opening the way eventually for Europe democratically to breathe on its 2 lungs, east and west, in the words of the Polish Pope John Paul II. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics combined its troops to barracks. There was to be no repeat of Budapest of 1956 or of Prague of 1968. For the remainder of 1989, it was not Warsaw Pact tanks, but rather a sense of liberation and of people power that quickly swept across the face of Central and Eastern Europe, marking the beginnings of their post-communist transitions. In the intervening years, much has changed, as we know, but not much of that change was foreseeable in advance. Bearing out the remark of the Danish physicist and early 20th century Nobel Prize winner Niels Bohr, and I quote, it's a quote I use a lot because I like it, he said, "Prediction is very difficult, especially when it's about the future." This suggests a degree of prudence is warranted when seeking to assess how things may evolve in the years to come. And so what follows from me is an assessment of where we stand, but prudently, not a prediction of where we are going. Let me begin with the European Union and my hypothesis, which I want to try to establish for you, that the Union is about to embark on a series of really important debates, many mentioned here, and many of them are debates of a rather introspective but indispensable character nonetheless. Today, after successive exercises in deepening through treaty change and widening through enlargements, the European Union consists of 28 member states. It has a population of 514 million and a GDP at market prices of more than 15 trillion euros. The EU is 7% of the world's population. It accounts for 1/5 of the world's trade and 1/4 of the world's income. It has survived a difficult decade, and this speaks both to its resilience but also to its vulnerability, something which I believe you're picking up in the expert scientific papers to which you have referred. That decade has been marked by a series of crises whose consequences are now visible on the electoral maps of our member states. Mass unemployment, especially youth unemployment, rising poverty, social inequality, and on one side, so we're talking here largely about Southern Europe and the crisis, and fears about bailouts, a transfer union, and unorthodox monetary policy on the other side, have led in the European Union to a north-south cleavage. And I think it's important to recognize it, because if you're going to solve a problem, you have to accept first that you have a problem. And so I think it's important that these things need to be put on the table. Unprecedented migratory flows into the EU, especially in 2015, as a result of the Syrian civil war, have brought in their wake unprecedented internal political tensions, both at EU external and at member state national borders. These have been accentuated by values-driven issues concerning free media, freedom of expression, and freedom of judiciary between EU institutions and Poland and Hungary in particular, revealing an East-West cleavage based more on this values dimension. We can add to this, in the past decade, terrorist attacks that have heightened a sense of vulnerability and insecurity, and that have blurred the policy boundaries between internal and external security policy. Russia's annexation of Crimea, its destabilization of Donbass, its muscle flexing, cyber sabotage, and disinformation campaigns have revived older memories and fears in many of our member states. In all of this, the data shows that trust in politics and political institutions, both national and European, was eroded. Trust between member states was strained. It led President Juncker in his September 2016 State of the Union address. So that's not so far ago. That was in September, just 2 years back, not fully 2 years. Let me quote what he said. "Never before have I seen so much fragmentation, so little commonality in our union. Never before have I seen such little common ground between our member states." Significant political respite emerged in 2017 with the containment of right-wing populism in the Dutch general election in March and the subsequent emergence of Emmanuel Macron as President of France in May and his party's gains in the June Assemblée Nationale elections. Energized by these developments in the Netherlands and France, Jean-Claude Juncker's September 2017 speech, so just a few months ago, and 1 year after his stark warning, had a different tone. I will quote just one sentence. "The wind is back in Europe's sails," he said, "but we will go nowhere unless we catch that wind." As a weather vane of how the wind is blowing, economically, the European Union has turned the corner. For the past 2 years, economic growth in the EU has outpaced Japan and the United States. Last year, every member state in the Union recorded positive economic growth. I underline every member state, which unhappily for a decade was not the case for so many. Unemployment remains high, is coming down, and is, though high, still at its lowest level since the onset of the economic and financial crisis. All this relatively good news, so that put wind in the sails of Mr. Juncker, failed, however, to yield positive returns for established political parties based on the most recent election results. In October last year, Austria's Freedom Party won 26% of the popular vote and 51 seats in the Austrian Parliament and entered government 2 months later in Vienna. In Italy's general election just a few weeks ago, the Five Star Movement and the Lega between them won 50% of the vote, crushing the established parties. And the challenge now for Italy, of course, is the complexity of government formation in the diversity of the choices available to do that. While this week we have witnessed Viktor Orban in Hungary securing a third consecutive mandate with his most resounding victory to date, based on a virulently anti-immigration campaign. Anger, resentment, disillusionment and fear have fueled the rise of populism of the left and of the right. The result is that our politics has become more volatile, more contested, and more fragmented. The European Parliament elections next year will be another testing ground, and interesting because of their pan-union nature. The last time around in 2014, the European Parliament elections in 5 member states, Denmark, France, Greece, Italy and the United Kingdom, voted for populist parties who gained between 1/5 and 1/4 of the popular vote. And that is, as I said, the elections of 4 years ago. Successively, in election after election at member state level, incumbent governments have lost seats or power or both. Traditional parties of the centre, left and right, have lost ground in every election. Political fragmentation has made post-election coalition building slower and more complex. The tapestry of our political systems has become more varied and diverse, and consequently, mobilizing governing majorities presents a more intricate challenge. I tell all of that not to counsel despair, but to observe one practical thing. If all that is happening, these trends are bound to have spillover consequences for EU policy making. It has to be acknowledged, however, when we go down from the high good macroeconomic news, that while the overall economic picture is positive, it masks huge divergences. I want to take just one example. Germany's nominal GDP, so that means the growth including real growth and inflation. Germany's nominal GDP rose by 34% between Q1, the first quarter 2007, and Q4 of 2017. This was a compound average annual rate of 2.7%. Italy's nominal GDP between the first quarter of 2007 and the last quarter of 2017 rose by only 9%, a compound annual rate of 0.8%. And if we look at Italy's real GDP, what we find is that in the last quarter of 2017, Italy's real GDP was 5% less than in the first quarter of 2007. And when we take real GDP per capita, the bit getting a bit closer to the individual, albeit that the GDP data is of value and limited value at the same time. The GDP per capita in real terms in Italy at the end of 2017 was 9% lower than in 2007. It's no wonder that Italians were disillusioned. This is, as the Americans say, this is not rocket science. These are the realities. And even as we talk correctly about macroeconomic improvement, and this is absolutely true, when you look at the divergences within states or between states, the divergences speak also a truth, and we cannot only take the convenient truth. If we're to address problems, we need also to embrace the inconvenient truths that go with it. Unaddressed, this issue that I describe remains a systemic vulnerability, recognized by President Macron, who's been pushing for ambitious reform to complete the architecture and policy instruments of the Economic and Monetary Union and the Banking Union. From reports of the first tête-à-tête between Chancellor Merkel since her formation of the Große Koalition in Berlin and Mr. Macron at a meeting in Paris, it would appear that Chancellor Merkel is cautiously resisting Mr. Macron's push for more joint financial resources and still insists there should be no disincentive effect for deficit-prone countries. So this debate is still going on very much with intensity behind the scenes between Paris and Berlin. I want to return to that later. I should say also about the banking union that quite a number of creditor member states say they are happy to see a bank resolution fund, which is the funding for banks that collapse, but only after Italy has cleaned up its banking asset sheet problem, which means, you know, it's like St. Paul on the road to Damascus or whatever. You wonder when might it happen in that case, because these preconditionalities are extremely difficult. I think the eventual and eagerly awaited Franco-German consensus can be a point of departure. I would call it, in those phrases we know in economic classes, as a necessary, but not a sufficient condition, a necessary condition without which reform cannot be achieved, but with which, if treaty changes reform is required, reform cannot be assured without serious buy-in by other member states. Because when you have treaty reform, if it requires that, it requires that each member state ratify the new treaty. And therefore you need the buy-in of member states either to bring it through their parliaments or through referendum if that is their constitutional preference. If that is going to be a dominant issue in the coming months, and it will be because it is on the agenda for the June summit and to continue then at other summit meetings, the same can also be said about the bargaining process on the next medium-term financial framework to cover EU budgets from 2021 to 2027. This too will be a dominant theme. The United Kingdom's departure could remove from the EU budget up to a net 94 billion euros in the period under consideration, at a time when many policy aspirations require more and not less EU resources. In a spectrum from ambitious overhaul and new own resources for the EU budget to living with a smaller budget in a smaller union, this is going to be a very testing debate. Mario Monti has led a group which has done a really excellent report, which I'm sure will be referred to in your work, on the own resources question and a new perspective for budgets. But there is a school of thought, again, among several of the northern creditor states, who are saying if the budget gets smaller because Britain leaves, this is life. And so this is always a tough thing. Joan Colom knows it from the trenches in the European Parliament over many years, but this time is going to be very tough. Few issues mark the east-west cleavage in Europe and the centrist, populist political divide as clearly as attitudes to migration, border control, refugees and asylum seekers. The EU has been working to reform and develop the common European asylum system and to reform the Dublin III regulation, which has been in force since January 2014. This assigns responsibility for processing an asylum application primarily to the member state of first entry. This system imploded under the strain of the unprecedented migrant flows of 2015, leading the Commission to propose a new Dublin IV regulation in May of 2016. That still is not adopted as law. Among the innovations suggested is a system of relocation from countries receiving disproportionate numbers. While this, for example, might address some of the concerns of Italian populists, equally it most likely would inflame populist sentiment in the Visegrad states, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic and Slovakia. In December 2017, the European Commission launched infringement procedures in the European Court of Justice against Poland, Hungary and the Czech Republic for non-compliance with their legal obligations on relocation. Meanwhile, during his recent election campaign, the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán announced that he would propose alternative amendments to the Dublin IV regulation, based, he said, on a focus on security and strict expulsion policy and rejection of any kind of mandatory admittance quota. For the record, you should know that the new EU Frontier and Coast Guard Service is now fully operational, and they report the flow of migrants at 204,000 in 2017, dropping to its lowest level in the last 4 years. So we have the reform of the completion of Economic and Monetary Union and Banking Union, a big item on the agenda. We have the intricacy of the next financial framework, a big item on the agenda. Let me turn very briefly to Brexit, just as process, not as substantive analysis. The Brexit negotiations continue to occupy necessary institutional and political attention, as details of the withdrawal agreement and a political declaration on future relations are being worked out. The level of ambition and detail of that declaration are being actively debated and explored by both sides as we speak. The agreement will then need to be adopted by the EU and the UK respectively to permit the United Kingdom's exit at midnight on the 29th of March of next year from the European Union, to facilitate its passage to a transition system and to permit it as a third country to finalise any trade deal, because the EU only makes trade deals with third parties and not with itself. It has a single market for itself and trade arrangements for others. I don't want to go into the detail on that, at least at this moment, but this is part of treaty law and not just of political choice. To add to this time next year, the European Parliament will hold its last legislative session in this month. And the elections are scheduled to be held between May 23rd and May 26th of next year. This will be followed by the nomination of the next European Commission President, a new European Commission, and a new President of the European Council, and will occupy and preoccupy the political institutional calendar of Europe up to October of 2019. The list of policy issues reviewed, so Economic and Monetary Union and Banking Union, the next EU budget cycle, reform of asylum policy, Brexit, and EU institutional renewal, is not exhaustive. I accept it's illustrative. But it points to one big conclusion. All of these issues are internal to the EU itself. And however consensual or divergent these debates may prove to be, they are therefore introspective. Europe talking to itself about itself, but not talking to itself about its place in the world. And there's only so much political capital to go around. There's so many hours in a day, there's so much political capital to invest, and if it's invested in these things, there's not a lot left over to invest in a lot of other things. And that's really the first conclusion I wanted to arrive at, locating a European perspective, that finding the space is going to be a challenge. Let me begin to turn to the rest of the world, the non-EU space. Popular descriptions of Vladimir Putin as a new Tsar, or Xi Jinping as a new emperor, or Tayyip Recep Erdogan as a new sultan, reveal a decisive shift to a more authoritarian and less liberal democratic world. At a time when the West needs to redouble its efforts to preserve the rule of law, freedom, democracy, and openness, the anchor of the past 7 decades is weighed, or being weighed, as the American ship of state is propelled by a nationalist America First drift designed to appeal to a nativist electoral base. Whether Trumpism is a passing phase, a new normal, or a decisive deconstructionist shift is too soon to call. It is also too important to ignore, obliging the EU, therefore, to step up its promotion and defence of free trade, the fight against climate change, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, nuclear non-proliferation, and to look with more urgency in future to its own security and defence capacity, including the fight against terrorism, improving intelligence gathering, and combating cyber attacks. And Brexit poses real risks in this regard and necessitates a close security and defence cooperation in future between the EU and UK if we're to avoid, with its departure, opening up new exploitable gaps in the armoury of self-interest, security and protection. In what follows regarding China, Russia and the United States, or more precisely, the pronouncements of their current leaders, let me observe in advance, before I visit each of the 3 consecutively, how each in their own national political narrative seeks to address perceived past humiliations as a driver of contemporary policy. Let me turn first to China. It has been a habit of commentators, especially in the USA, and not without justification since the end of World War II, to describe successive US presidents as, quote, the most powerful man in the world. The time is fast approaching, if indeed it is not already past, when that title will belong to the President of China. Xi Jinping is President of China, General Secretary of the Communist Party, Chairman of the Central Military Commission, which oversees the National Armed Forces, and last year he was named at the People's Congress Core Leader, a designation that places him on the same status as Mao Zedong. The abolition this year, just weeks ago, of term limits on the presidency by the People's Congress has paved the way for Xi to rule indefinitely. Whether that's for the rest of his life or not, one doesn't know, but now there is no constitutional constraint. But of course, the opaqueness of the Communist Party system makes reading inside always a difficult issue about its power politics. China initiated economic reforms and trade liberalization nearly 40 years ago with the rise to power of Deng Xiaoping, who politically twice survived Mao's Cultural Revolution. Deng spoke of promoting socialism with Chinese characteristics through what he called a socialist market economy. Until then, China was poor, stagnant, communist command and control and closed economy. When the USA recognized China in 1979 and accommodated China's One China policy regarding Taiwan, a major transformation began. On average since then, 1979, China has doubled its real GDP every 8 years since. It has raised 800 million people from poverty, and it has been described by the World Bank, and I quote, as the fastest sustained expansion by a major economy in world history. It has become the world's largest economy on purchasing power parity basis, and globally today, China is the largest manufacturer in the world, the largest merchandise trader in the world, and the largest holder of foreign exchange reserves in the world, and that's today. That's not the future, that's now. After years of negotiation, when China eventually agreed to tariff reductions, to open markets, and to industrial policy reforms, it finally was admitted to the World Trade Organization at the end of 2001. China today is the number one trading partner, its number one trading partner in the world is EU, with total merchandise bilateral trade amounting to $618 billion US dollars, compared to trade with the USA of $581 billion. China's share of global exports grew from 2% in 1990 to 13.2% in 2017, making it the biggest single exporter of merchandise goods in the world. With strong economic power comes political power and influence. The West's bet that integrating China into the world economy eventually would see it move towards freedom and Western-style democracy through a rising middle class has not been borne out. The Communist Party continues to dominate the state apparatus. At the 19th Congress last autumn, President Xi explicitly held out the Chinese model, I quote, as a new option for other countries. Not only is it not changing, it's changing to say actually ours is the best path to development. Under Xi, media censorship has been tightened. China controls a vast volume of internet and social media content through the largest censorship system in the world, known as the Great Firewall of China. This is a shared exercise between government monitors and technology and telecoms companies, and these are compelled to enforce state rules. The socialist part of the economic model finds expression in up to 150,000 state-owned enterprises in China. These reportedly may account for, and forgive using may and not do, because it's a guesstimate. Scholars following these issues in China find that level of state enterprise opaque in terms of trying to measure output. It may account for up to 50% of non-agricultural GDP. These state-owned enterprises continue to dominate sectors such as petroleum, mining, telecommunications, utilities, transportation, and some other industrial sectors. They are shielded from competition, they are encouraged to invest overseas, and they dominate the listings on China's stock index. State-owned or controlled banks in China account for 68.5% of banking assets. Foreign participation in China's banking system amounts to 1.6% of the asset base, which is marginal, even negligible. Seeking to avoid a classic middle income trap, because we know states can develop and then they hit a ceiling. So what do you do next? China has announced at the recent Congress the Made in China 2025 strategy. This aims to create global leadership in aviation, in technology including artificial intelligence and robotics, and in energy including renewables and electric vehicles. And it's thought that it could encompass up to 40% of the Chinese manufacturing base. Whether this will work out remains to be seen, but the mobilizing force of the state through subsidies and protection should not be underestimated by outsiders. The modernization of China's military, naval, air force, cyber, and space capacity has been a major priority. China has the largest army in the world, and after the United States, the second largest annual military expenditure, and it's growing from a larger GDP. Last year, it launched its first home-built aircraft carrier, due to be fully commissioned in the coming years. Additional, more sophisticated home-produced aircraft carriers reportedly are planned. China has flexed its muscles by building landing strips on artificial islands and reefs in the South China Sea, claiming jurisdiction over the surrounding territorial waters. and testing the resolve of its neighbours and the strategic commitment of the United States. Taiwan, Malaysia, Vietnam, the Philippines and Brunei each have competing claims in that stretch of water with China. This area is an area where 1/3 of the world's maritime trade passes every year. So this is not an insignificant stretch of water in terms of its strategic implications. By way of example, China has been willing to use sharp commercial policy and cut imports from the Philippines when this island hopping strategy was contested by the Philippines. The One China policy as regards Taiwan is the cornerstone of healthy ties with the USA, the EU and others, and it is policed with great sensitivity by Chinese diplomacy. China, of course, also now deploys the full panoply of soft power through cultural, educational, academic, diplomatic and sporting foundations and associations. It is claimed by Chinese official media that 86 countries and international organizations have signed 100 cooperation agreements with China under the Belt and Road Initiative. China hopes to gain better return on its foreign exchange reserves, to create new overseas business opportunities for Chinese firms, to create new markets for industries currently experiencing overcapacity, and to stimulate economic development in poorer regions of China through this One Belt, One Road initiative. China's vision of itself is as the leading, uncontested power in the region in the decades to come. To appreciate China's self-assertion, it is necessary to acknowledge not just its growing wealth, but also its domestic, national, political narrative known as the century of humiliation. This began by Chinese defeat by the British Empire in 1842 with the close of the First Opium War, and ended in the national narrative in 1949 with the seizure of power by Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party. Xi Jinping, in his address to the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party, extolled that once great nation of the past. He said that, and I quote, plunged into the darkness of domestic turmoil and foreign aggression. Its people were ravaged by wars, saw their homeland torn, and lived in poverty and despair. Against that narrative, now that China has stepped out of the shadow, it is determined to restore what it sees as its rightful place as a world power and as the dominant power of East Asia. Let me turn to Russia. Russia, too, has a narrative of humiliation of more recent origin and shorter duration. Severe stagnation domestically in the USSR and the need for fundamental economic reforms on the one hand, and political independence movements in the Baltic states and rebellion in the Caucasus in 1988 on the other, started the process internally of Soviet disintegration. A failed coup in August 1991, aimed at sustaining the communist status quo, lacked popular support, and Boris Yeltsin, Russia's first democratically elected president since June of that year, seized the moment. Thereafter, the Soviet Union collapsed rapidly in the final quarter of 1991 to be replaced by 15 new countries and not by the then communist-planned Commonwealth of Independent States. The Cold War was over, the threat of nuclear annihilation receded, the prospect of a peace dividend presented itself, democracy and free markets spread across the former Soviet empire, but in a mutated form, absent the values and institutions that fundamentally respected individual dignity, freedom, and the rule of law. A form of Wild East crony capitalism and autocratic managed democracy was fueled by the proceeds of privatizations, through shallow institutional reform, by a lack of regulatory oversight, and by a system of elite impunity throughout the region. The emergence of wealthy oligarchs paralleled in a way the robber barons of the late 19th century early American capitalism, who became rich through ruthless and unscrupulous business practice. Russia suffered a severe financial crisis in August '88. A combination of high fixed exchange rate, chronic deficits, the cost of the First War in Chechnya, and falling commodity prices saw a run on the reserves of the Russian central bank. Inflation spiked at 84%. Many private, perhaps even dodgy private banks collapsed, and many ordinary Russians, newly emerging middle class, lost everything in the crisis. By this time, a St. Petersburg politician and former KGB Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Putin was a junior part of Yeltsin's administration. He became, by the administration's agreement, the acting president when Yeltsin retired at the end of 1999. Yeltsin contested and won on the first round by fair means or foul the election and beat the communist candidate in year 2000, and he was re-elected again in 2004. High oil prices, a commodity boom and prudent fiscal policy saw a steady rise in GDP in those years. His term of office, however, was marked by reasserting a dominant political centre, by stifling political opposition, by cracking down on media freedom and non-governmental organisations, and by taming any political ambitions of other oligarchs through imprisonment of Mikhail Khodorkovsky and the breakup of UKOS, and finally by renationalising energy resources. In a State of the Union speech in 2005, to come to Putin's sense of humiliation, Putin revealed his credo. First, and I quote, "Above all," he said, "we should acknowledge that the collapse of the Soviet Union was a major geopolitical disaster of the century." And this is open and in full public view and for a very long time. He added, also certain is that Russia should continue its civilizing mission on the Eurasian continent. This mission consists in ensuring that democratic values, combined with national interest, to be underlined, enrich and strengthen our historic community. This reference to our historic community clearly was a contemporary restatement by Putin of the Soviet politics of the near abroad and of its earlier imperial antecedent based on spheres of influence. He went on to issue a warning. Again, I quote, "We consider international support for the respect of the rights of Russians abroad an issue of major importance, one that cannot be the subject of political and diplomatic bargaining. We hope that the new members of NATO and the European Union in the post-Soviet era will show their respect for human rights, including the rights of ethnic minorities, through their actions." The Baltic states were among the first to feel the effects of Putin's policy of near abroad, with harassment of their diplomats in Moscow, disturbances by agents provocateurs in Tallinn, economic pressure on transit and transport links, and systematic cyber attacks. And this is more than a decade ago. If you want to learn in your security and defense about cyber attacks, go east. If you want to meet Europe's and possibly the world's first minister for this topic, go to Vilnius. And I had the pleasure to meet that minister last December in Vilnius. And why are they on the front line? Precisely because of their proximity to the ethics and the effects of which I now speak. Putin, as you know, was constitutionally limited to 2 terms. And in a move that respected the letter of the law, whatever about its spirit, Dmitry Medvedev, his political associate, won the presidency in 2008 and immediately appointed Putin as prime minister. By 2012, the presidential term had extended from 4 to 6 years, and then the tandem reversed, with Putin returning to the presidency and Medvedev then being immediately appointed as the prime minister. And last month, Putin won his 4th term and largest share of the vote by whatever means fair and foul, and is scheduled to stay in office right through to 2024, which would see him in unbroken power for almost an entire quarter of a century. In an article he published in Izvestia on the 4th of October 2011, when he contemplated returning to the presidency for a third time, Putin outlined his main foreign policy priority. He said he wanted to bring ex-Soviet states into a Eurasian Union, building on an existing customs union with Belarus and Kazakhstan. Quote, "We are not going to stop there," he wrote, "and are setting an ambitious goal to achieve an even higher integration level in the Eurasian Union." He envisaged the new union as supranational, so a Eurasian EU, except with a very big Russian dominance along the way. A supranational body would coordinate economic and currency policy between its members. It would be open to new members, such as in the Central Asian republics of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. He also made a veiled criticism of Ukraine at that time, and that's 2011, saying that any choice to stay outside would be a wrong choice. And we've seen, of course, the fruits of that view in action from the Crimean annexation of 2014. So it's clear, if we look at the Putin era, that the weaponization of energy, the willingness to reassert a politics of the near abroad in a post-Soviet, neo-Soviet style, and the determination to seek to draw others immediately and directly into a Russian sphere of influence is an explicit policy. It's not hidden. Some of the European debates, you might wonder if people ever read those speeches, but it certainly was never hidden. This is a policy in full public view. The Greater Russia was invoked when he spoke to an elite audience in the Kremlin in March 2014, on the day he marked the annexation of Crimea. And I quote, "Millions of people went to bed in one country and awoke in different ones, overnight becoming ethnic minorities in former Union republics, while the Russian nation became one of the biggest, if not the biggest, ethnic group in the world to be divided by borders." So resentment and humiliation and national pride and determination to do something about it is different but common with the century of humiliation hypothesis of Xi Jinping. In terms of the West, Putin had a very interesting to say about that moment when the United States was the unilateral superpower. Our Western partners, led by the United States of America, prefer not to be guided by international law and their practical policies, but by the rule of the gun. And they've come to believe in their exclusivity and exceptionalism, and they can decide the destinies of the world that only they can ever be right. So again, you can see a very burning resentment with high degrees of unilateralism among those he perceives to be threatening a Russian interest. Of course, Putin has a counterpart doctrine, the right of intervention in its near neighbours abroad, which included the military action in Georgia, which has included the annexation of Crimea, and which has now included the reassertion of Russia and most of its Black Sea fleet, both in terms of submarines and naval vessels, in the eastern Mediterranean, currently in support of Mr. Assad's regime. Diplomatically and politically, this is the return to the international top table for Russia as a power broker, and has given President Putin a contemporary opportunity to show at home and abroad Russia's new military hardware and capacity. Militarily, Russia is now back in the eastern Mediterranean, where it had been absent for a long period of years. Russia, of course, has also mastered hybrid warfare techniques that economize on the use of force to achieve its ends. Russia, of course, is not alone in this. Most great powers do it. All major powers today have developed similar capacities, but not all of them practice the black arts with such public and brazen effect. The weaponization of energy prices as a tool of foreign policy was especially notable with Ukraine in year 2000 and 2006 and 2009. Russia has maintained strong connections with former territories of the Soviet Empire, including in Central and Eastern Europe, and with their political and business elites through energy supply chains. The chief of the Russian General Staff, General Gerasimov, in 2013 in an article on modern warfare, emphasized how much more often non-military means would be used in modern conflicts compared to conventional weapons. And that toolkit ranges from cyber attacks and hacking to the use of proxies, internet trolls, bots, and fake news farms. The objective of the latter, of course, is to muddy the waters and cast doubt on what actually is true. The interference in the recent presidential elections in the United States is a case in point, but is not unique. Some of this activity, of course, is of a simpler and classical form of soft power through media outlets, sponsored friendly think tanks, and friendly foreign political actors. But it is an information war which is always underway in different degrees, in different places, but with the same objective, to influence opinion and outcomes. To close on Russia, in a vast country that extends over 11 time zones, and even allowing for the elections that are not exactly free and fair, it would be wrong to suppose that Mr. Putin is not genuinely popular. His strongman self-projection and his strong Russian national projection provoke a sense of popular pride as a counterpoint to perceived post-Soviet humiliations. A retreat into nationalism has also acted for Putin as a counterpoint to the poorly performing Russian economy, which under his leadership has remained under-diversified and still overly dependent on commodity trade, especially oil and gas. The IMF GDP estimates for 2017, based on purchasing power parity, placed China as the first economic power in the world, the EU, with Britain included, as the second, the United States as the third, and Russia as the sixth. The Russian landmass is 4 times larger than the EU, but its economy is only 1/5 of its EU equivalent, despite Russia being an energy superpower. Let me turn to the United States. A consequence of the ending of the Cold War was that bipolarity ended, leaving the United States in a dominant position as a military actor. With total spectrum dominance, no near equivalent to America existed at that moment. America was a hyperpower compared to any of the alternatives after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In a famous essay in 1989, The End of History, ? And Mr. Francis Fukuyama insists on the question mark because it was indeed the title. Let me quote what he said. What we may be witnessing is not just the end of the Cold War or the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. That is, the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. This proved, of course, to be a radical misreading of the consequences of the collapse of the Soviet Union, as we now know. But it did nourish a sense of hubris, and particularly among a key political group in the United States, the so-called neoconservatives. America's might was aroused by the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., whose images on television gripped the world. In pursuit of Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda, who claimed responsibility for the attacks, America, supported by NATO, went to war in Afghanistan because Osama bin Laden was deemed to be hiding there and the Taliban authorities didn't want to give him up. The US then went to war with Iraq in 2003 with a coalition of the willing on the alleged imminent threat of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. This was disputed by many at that time and has proven to be untrue since that time. Another pretext for the war in Iraq was to bring democracy to the Middle East, and this proved illusory and counterproductive. The region, in fact, has become more fragile. And the fight against terrorism, as it was then also presented, begat more determined regional terrorism through the emergence of ISIS and Daesh. Regional rivalries between Saudi Arabia and Iran have been fanned. The Syrian civil war and Russia's determination to use it to return to the international scene are all part of the consequences in this broader tableau. For Americans, the memories of victory in the Second World War turned into dust in the wastelands and provinces of Iraq and Afghanistan, a similar fate to the ill-fated Soviet war in Afghanistan decades earlier. China and the USA have clashed in the past decade on currency policy and on the need for China to shift its economy more towards domestic consumption than export-reliant growth. Both these things have been and are being addressed by Chinese policy. And today, if you look at the investment and consumption ratios in the Chinese macro data, you will see that the Chinese national demand and consumption is going up with great consistency. And there is a reorientation of the economy, not to give up the trade, but to find alternative means of growth fueled from within. Yet in the United States, the rise in incomes of the wealthiest continue to explode, and the real incomes of middle-class households and the poor have stagnated or been reversed. There is a perceptible gap between the United States self-image and narrative of meritocratic openness, the American dream, and actual American societal realities. The reasons for this are multifaceted. They include globalization and trade, but importantly also technological change, de-skilling of the labour force, de-unionization of the labour force, the rising value of education. So if you're not educated, you're left further behind. And also, in some cases in areas of the United States, aging demography of a sort that Europeans would be familiar with. Despite this complexity, trade, technology, de-skilling, education, demography, for many US politicians, free trade in general, and China in particular, have become the main and often the only lightning rod to conduct the anger and resentment of those who felt that they had lost out and were left behind. Donald Trump's presidency, I would say to you today, and its electoral base, is an expression of this reality and not a cause. Trump is an expression of something, not a very elegant expression, but a real expression of something that is real and that has not been caused by Trumpism. What President Trump brings is an America First nationalism. He perceives the world as consisting of winners and losers, typical zero-sum logic. In this he finds a good counterpart in Vladimir Putin, whose policy process is also a very zero-sum logic space. Let me quote, it's only 3 words, "I do bilateralism," Trump has boasted several times. He uses it signaling his aversion to multilateralism, a hypothesis that you're exploring in your papers. His appetite for American dominance yearns for a unilateral strength, which in my view is a thing that has already passed. Make America great again is an interesting slogan, but its greatness is at peak or post-peak and is not in sight in any future realistic geopolitical assessment. His instincts and rhetoric risk to undermine and certainly to weaken the post-war institutions created by America with its allies that have been a true American soft power strength. Signaling his protectionist instincts, the President abandoned the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership on day one. The great deal maker gave a free gift to China for nothing, which I find staggering, especially allowing for the great deal-making hypothesis that he pretends to have. Also, he announced that the United States would cease participation in the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change mitigation. After a settling-in period, he has confirmed the traditional US alliances with Korea, Japan, and NATO, but it's hard to avoid the impression that this was more by necessity than personal conviction. To the amazement of other international allies, including the European Union, I might even say especially the European Union, President Trump has declared his intention to withdraw from the Iran nuclear accord. For someone who professes to want to insist on non-proliferation with Korea, it's an odd lesson to give in advance of meeting a North Korean leader with nuclear force, that the ones who did a deal with you, you're going to tear up because you don't like it. In spite of the fact that the international commissions who follow this have never put in a negative report to do with Iran's fulfillment of the necessary conditions. I think his talks with North Korea and their consequence will be an interesting and serious test of this administration's capacity to act. So I make it wider than just the president as an individual. As you know, he's been threatening a trade war with China, and both parties have been ratcheting up one after another planned retaliatory measures. And then earlier this week, Xi Jinping tried to cool it a bit, but we don't yet know where this will end up. Trump disdains the World Trade Organization, which is the only global structure capable of mediating trade disputes among member states, and he is also hollowing out that institution by a failure to nominate personnel for its appeals court. There are several missing appeals judges, and it's coming to a critical point where the appeals court might cease to exist because of the absence of nomination of sufficient staff. It may not be quick, but it's available. But if you take it off the field, you're actually hollowing out the institution from within. As you know, he recently tweeted an intention to leave Syria soon, as tonight he contemplates projecting American military power there in response to the recent gas attack. His administration has had more resignations or sackings of key personnel in 1 year than most presidents would have over a 2-term presidency. The departures recently of Gary Cohn, Rex Tillerson, and General McMaster, and those who have replaced them, suggest that the president is surrounding himself with enablers, freeing him to pursue his own instincts unconstrained. What he said about this, and I quote, "I'm closer to having the cabinet I want." His refusal to declare his taxes, to clearly sever his business ties, his appointments of family members to staff positions in the West Wing, his Twitter-enabled attack dog style, his attitudes to women, migrants, and white supremacists set him apart. These are a window into his character, something which was long since formed for every president before they reached high office. Trump's character trusts his own instinct, likes to project a self-image of toughness, and steadfastly refuses to be bound by rules and norms of those who went before him in the modern era presidency. Separately and collectively, these traits seem to act as a bond between the president and his electoral base, and that base sees his behaviour as characteristic of being a regular, an ordinary guy, one of us, not one of them, even as his recent tax reforms made the rich richer. Trump's America First rhetoric, like Xi Jinping and Putin, speaks of national grievance and humiliation. "They're all laughing at us" is a very regular phrase in Trump's speeches. They being the rest of the world laughing at America, who made bad deals, and they need a guy like me to make the good deals, is the counterpoint. "We make terrible deals," he keeps saying. And his mission, as the deal maker he perceives himself to be, is to put that right. I would say in summary on Trumpism, it is too soon to discern whether this is a presidency whose bark will be worse than its bite, or whether the USA under Trump is becoming a revisionist power whose legacy will be one of rupture on the international stage. But what is clear is that the incumbent power, the USA, is shaping up to confront China's challenge. Time is on China's side, which may add to the US sense of urgency or of Trumpian aggressiveness, while America still perceives itself to occupy pole position. Let me briefly mention, and under-mention because I've gone on too long, There are other actors. To this geopolitical review, one can add the continued fragility of the Middle East, Sunni Shiite tensions and regional power rivalries, the ongoing war in Syria, the failed state of Libya, the brittle interdependencies between the EU and Turkey, and the growing relationship between Putin and Erdogan. Africa would deserve an entire paper of its own. And so if I put it in a paragraph, it's because I don't think, in terms of doing this, I could do it justice without a whole other script. But with a population of 1.2 billion today, and a UN projection of 2.4 billion Africans by 2050, globally, its development will become a dominant, perhaps the dominant challenge of the future, especially for the EU because of our geographic proximity, because the pull of our prosperity for poor African migrants who take dreadful risks to try to find a new life here, and because of the strident anti-migration politics in so many EU states. This is going to be a seriously tough challenge to manage politically, and one that gives Europe a prime interest in Africa's development, which, if the fairy godmother could come and wave a wand, you can do by putting in funds and assistance and building capacity. But one of the problems that Africa still has is very high indebted countries, many of whom had their debts written off when they used to be the highly indebted countries, and now they're back in the high debt game. And very many African states, unfortunately, have very kleptocratic governments, and it makes it very difficult, if you want to mobilize economic action, to find the counterpart actors. And so this, I think, as I said, deserves a lot more consideration. Let me finish out by coming back to the EU. In this wider frame, so I've talked about China, Russia, and USA, the EU needs to look to its positioning and its capacity to act in the interests of member states and citizens. The world has definitely taken a more authoritarian and less liberal turn. As a major trading bloc that runs a large balance of trade surplus, the EU is vulnerable to any degradation of the world trade system or to the emergence of protectionism. Despite numerous efforts to become more energy self-sufficient, the EU remains vulnerable to its external energy dependencies. The next wave of enlargement, whatever its pace and scale, will relate to the states of the Western Balkans, and this is going to be a complicated process. On security and defence, collectively, the EU has made progress, but it falls short of a capacity for meaningful strategic engagement on an international scale. Indeed, Brexit will diminish the EU's capacity in these domains. Member states jealously guard their foreign policy as sovereignty-sensitive issues and are unlikely to yield dramatic new powers to the EU centre. The rise of populism within the EU itself reveals a less liberal and more nationalist mindset, and unchecked, this rise of populism could begin to corrode the Union from within as one contemplates future geopolitical roles. Ignoring the grievances which have fueled the rise in populism risks only to enhance it. Conceding to populism's more extreme self-expression would be to undermine the Union as a community of values. Working assiduously to find a common interest, Jean Monnet's method, a common interest that is concrete and not abstract, and on a scale of imagination to make a decisive difference, is elusive, but not impossible. Another generation of Europeans were sufficient to that task, and it is not necessarily mission impossible, but it's certainly not easy. Quickly, I will go through those things and conclude. The European Union is the world's most advanced and integrated regional polity. Its bilateral and multilateral relations are built on a dense network of treaties and agreements. The EU has relied on and profited from the open and liberal post-war global order, including the trading system under the WTO and through NATO from Pax Americana. Its interests lie in the preservation of that order to the greatest extent possible. China's commitment to open trade, as witnessed by the Davos speech last year of Xi Jinping, and China's commitment to stay the course on the fight against climate change as an urgent national necessity are both positives on which the EU-China relationship can build, also with truly global impact. The EU imports today 2/3 of its energy and counts on Russia as one of its major suppliers of gas and oil. More than 1/4 of gas imports and more than 1/5 of oil imports in the EU are of Russian origin. With the economic recovery, EU energy demand has gone up and the dependency on external supply has gone up with it. The most recent data, like a good junkie, we're pumping some more drugs into our system and we're not recycling ourselves towards the renewables that we talk about, but we don't develop at a sufficient pace. This Russian part dependency has one other big impact in the EU, and that is that all the energy deals are bilateral deals between Russia and individual member states, rather than a big bilateral deal between the EU and Russia. China has done a big bilateral deal, has driven down the price per 1,000 cubic meters of gas, and has obliged the Russians to start investing to deliver it 55 billion euros in a trans-Siberian pipeline, which the Russians then wanted to land in Western China, and the Chinese said, no, you've got to bring it to Eastern China or no deal. It took 10 years of China holding out, and in the end, Russia signed the deal. We as Europe diminish ourselves by these multiple bilaterals, but we also diminish our foreign policy capacity, because every time a member state capital city privileges a bilateral relationship with any third party outside the Union doesn't have the card in its hand to play on the collective behalf. And this, to me, is a serious internal political debate that needs to be had in an honest and open way. If we want a more effective Europe, we need more effective Europeans to play that game. And it's not obvious from sovereignty sensitivity, as I've described, that that will change. Indeed, just one thing to remark, to do with the gas and oil from Russia, the supply level has gone up. The supply chains are even maybe going to be added to. So it's a simple equation. It's available, we need it, and they have it. And in fact, in spite of Crimea, sanctions and all those things, it's purely business as usual. So to do with those issues, there's been a high level of pragmatism and no ideology. Enlargement fatigue and having to deal with multiple crises slow down the accession prospects for new member states. But the question of the membership of the states of the Western Balkans is now back on the agenda. By virtue of Slavic cultural origins, religious orthodoxy in their tradition, awkward but strong ties with the Soviet bloc during the Cold War, and a difficult history on the margins of former empires such as the Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian empires, these particular candidate states inevitably will prove to be a happy hunting ground for Russian hybrid and covert activities, a factor that should not be and cannot be ignored by the EU. We should approach this task with real openness and determination, but with zero naivety. This is a tough field to play in, and it's cracked a lot of empires and empire-pretending groups many times in the past. And more generally, regarding foreign policy, there have been real advances, including the establishment of the European External Action Service and the recent initiation of PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation aiming to increase effectiveness in addressing security challenges and in advancing defence cooperation inside an EU framework. But as I said earlier, Brexit risks to detract from that in some degree. It is also worth noting the extent, as I've remarked, to which our national capitals prefer to privilege their bilateral relations over collective relations through the EU. And I tell you what I think this can risk to be in a plain language, that the EU's common foreign policy risks to end up being the 29th policy of 28 or the 28th policy of 27, not as primus inter pares, but as the weakest link in the chain. And so if we want to be in the geopolitical game, we need a wake-up call as to how we address that issue. And I think the question isn't that you go and give everything to Brussels so that someone organizes. It's that you agree which are your strategic priorities, where you give defined limits of agile action so that a center of power can act and react in real time rather than calling 9 months, 20 months, or like with the economic crisis, 3 years of European summits before you start getting some practical answers. That's not a way to have geopolitical weight. I want to finish with the rise of populist parties in EU. Since the year 2000, the rise in populist parties is striking. The populist share of the vote across Europe, right and left, has tripled since the year 2000. In 2000, on average, populist parties got 8.5% of the vote. Today, that number has risen to 24.1%. This is a study done across 39 European states, 102 populist parties, 3/4 of which are on the right, 1/4 of which are on the left. Right-wing populism is strongest in Eastern Europe. Right-wing populists are in power in Bosnia as majority, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, although they're trying to form a government now after their election, Hungary, Poland, Serbia, and Slovakia. If you add left-wing populism such as Syriza in Greece, populist governments today stretch in one unbroken chain from the Baltic Sea to the Aegean. And this could easily extend across the Adriatic to Italy, depending on the formation of government. This is a real phenomenon. If you've got a whole slice of Europe like that, it cannot be ignored because it's too big. And also, to do with some of its extremes, it cannot be yielded to at the extreme because it's too consequential for the core values of the Union. But this is a really tough challenge. I'm reminded of the speech that Winston Churchill gave in the United States, I think it was 1948, when the phrase "the Iron Curtain" came. He said there is a curtain stretching across the face of Europe, from Szczecin in Poland to Trieste in Italy, and it is an iron curtain in this Cold War. Now, I don't know what to call this new curtain, but we have a curtain that starts in the Baltics, ends in the Aegean, and could swing across to the Adriatic. That is very big. It doesn't go as far as Moscow, but it's very big in terms of where it stands. And these are majority populist parties and governments in those places. While anti-immigrant, anti-elite and anti-EU sentiment have been the drivers for much right-wing populism, anti-austerity, anti-capitalist and anti-globalization postures have been more popular in Southern Europe on the left. It is possible that populism in many instances is merely an interlude. For example, witness the rise and fall of UKIP in the United Kingdom. They got the biggest vote in the European Parliament elections in 2014. Britain won't participate in those elections next year, but on current form, opinion polling and disintegration, UKIP would struggle to win any seat in the Parliament elections were they free to participate. Populism may not be an interlude, it could be a new normal, more nationalist, more protectionist, less respectful of minority rights, but still operating within the norms of liberal democracy, but with spillover effects to less demagogic political party rivals inside or outside coalition governments. In some instances, at the limit, populist parties could weaken democratic norms, undermine, as we've seen, independent institutions, and intimidate or disempower rivals. This would be a corrosive effect. And in states where the experience of democratic governance is relatively recent, this gap between some Eastern and Western European states could become a deep rift, diminishing both in the process. And so to conclude, Europe must build its own consensus and find its voice, the better to project and protect its interests on the global stage. Europe cannot control what others do, but Europe can choose what we Europeans should do and say together. The world will not stop spinning on its axis, waiting for Europeans to make up their collective mind. The EU, by virtue of its scale and bargaining power, is better placed to exercise influence than any one of its member states would be in the emerging geopolitical environment of the 21st century. Whether member state governments understand and are willing to act on this challenge still is an open question. But as regards politics within the EU and the changing global geopolitical climate externally, Mr. Chairman, your topic is timely and well chosen, and thank you for your invitation.
Well, thank you by this magnificent lecture. It's possible to say in English magisterial lecture? Yes?
You could, but that
could
overinflate.
So thank you very much for this magisterial lecture. Time has gone. It was scheduled from 6 to 8. So thank you very much for your assistance and your attention. We will take your, if you agree, your lecture in our files of the, yes? Thank you very much, and that will enrich, obviously, the material that we will put at the disposal of our members in the framework of this third Congress. Thank you for your excellent contribution for the Congress. Thank you.